Welcome to the conversation.
Welcome to the conversation. This podcast, we interview Sara Davey, the CEO of the Leading Edge Academies Partnership, and we ask her to explain the 6 E's, the values that the Leading Edge Academies Partnership have as their guiding principles. The 6 E's are ethical, excellence, equity, empathy, evolution, and endurance. So, sit back and enjoy our interview with Sara Davey. Across the map, we have these 6 E's, which you can explain in a minute, and I'd ask you to talk about each of them and perhaps some of the research behind why you've chosen to choose these E's rather than other E's.
Perfect.
So what's the first one?
Okay, well, the first one is ethical. We want to make sure that all of the relationships we have within the trust are based on sound ethics, doing the right thing, in other words, and we want a clear set of values that are ethical. We have decided as a MAT to all sign up for the values-based education approach, and that's an award that we're all aiming to get, and that will allow us to use the language of the 6 E's, the values that we are working on together to make it in every aspect of the organisation, in every policy, in every practice. Yeah. In every relationship, we want it to be like a stick of rock through the whole organisation, and we think that is what will make the Leading Edge MAT really distinct.
Yeah. So, in terms of ethics, then, because obviously I want to ask you about research as well, as we discussed earlier. So, we talked earlier that there might not be a lot of research in terms of the ethics of education, but we have to have intellectual rigour behind the ethics system that we choose. So what sort of values? I know Mats Bay is a restorative justice school.
Yeah.
Like, is that a thing that you want for the other schools in the MAT? And what sort of intellectual decisions have you taken in terms of what sort of system of ethics you want?
Okay, well, I would then go to what politics would say about this, what the political philosophy is. And I would look at some political philosophies that we've rejected and some political philosophies that we're embracing. So a couple that we're rejecting, the first one would be neoliberalism. We reject the notion that we want to increase more market forces across education, and more opportunities for private companies to take over education, because we have direct experience as a MAT where that has proved to be disastrous for a community, with ALAT and Foy River Academy. So neoliberalism, we have got direct evidence that has not been good news for education. When businessmen take over education and think profit and not people. So that's one that we would reject. A second one we would question is a purely old-fashioned conservatism, where the idea is based on Plato's idea of the philosopher king, that you have a certain group of people in society that are better educated and better placed to be the leaders, and therefore rule things with greater effectiveness and efficiency, because that is basically an elitist position. So there's this idea that there is an elite that should have a certain type of education, grammar school,
Yeah.
and there's the masses that should have another type of education. So that whole division that has been really very, very clear throughout the English education system since it became a public organisation way back in the 16th century, that Plato has got a lot to answer for in that respect. So I don't reject, I definitely reject, as a grammar school girl myself, when the rest of my family went to secondary moderns, I saw how it absolutely tore apart families, communities, and it was totally unjust because my brothers and sisters were no less intelligent than I was. They just didn't have the same desire to be competitive and get to this grammar school. So I reject that one. Neoliberalism, rejected. Formal conservatism, rejected. Then I would look at the ideas of the Enlightenment as espoused by the Royal Society of Arts, wanting to create the idea of a better society, and principles based on the Enlightenment, where human beings are encouraged to flourish. Yeah. So that viewpoint, eudaimonia, Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia, that Greek philosopher, I do agree with. As I do Socrates.
Plato did say some good things as well, didn't he?
Oh, well, he did, but I think Socrates and Aristotle probably, I think politically I agree with a bit more. Okay. So Socrates was also talking about, having different dialectic viewpoints, and that's where the Enlightenment comes in. So I think we very much embrace that human flourishing idea, but it's not enough, because that's very individualistic. Yeah. It's a liberal approach that's very focusing on just the individual. What we want is a better community, not just a better individual. So that's why we've also embraced the social justice position, which is where we are saying that everybody has an entitlement to do well, and everyone is capable of doing well. Yeah. And that is the political viewpoint that this MAT has at its heart. Yeah.
And some of that is backed up by neuroscience in terms of neuroplasticity, the fact that brains can physically change as you learn new languages or new music, and backed up by the philosophy of the growth mindset type stuff, isn't it? So do you think growth mindset and neuroscience comes under that E for ethical, or perhaps all of them, actually?
I think it comes under all of them, actually. Yeah. But I do believe that you are being ethical if you treat people equally. Yeah. Hence equity. And you believe that everyone is capable of excellence. I think they're absolutely interrelated, to be honest.
So the second E is excellence. So, why did we, for example, choose to take on board the high performance learning methodology?
Well, I think there's been a long journey in the school at Mounts Bay to get us to the point of high performance learning. And the journey has involved us raising aspirations through a programme that was set up by the sports colleges originally, called the Global Institute of Student Aspirations, which was all about saying that, we are all capable of excellence. Yeah. We all want to be excellent, and it's possible. And that has influenced the whole culture of the school through the last decade. More recently, we've chosen to work with Professor Deborah at the High Performance Institute, the High Performance Learning organisation rather, because she has been able to articulate the habits and the values that make successful learners. Yeah. So what I think the piece of work needs to happen in this school, and that is chosen to do that, is that we need to turn the labels of habits and values into actual habits. Yeah. And values need to be everywhere. Yeah. So there's we've been very much in early stage of that.
Yeah, embedding that across every lesson, every activity that we do, extracurricular, everything. The third one on there is equity, which you talked about a little bit. I mean, how is equity different to ethics or the ethical E?
Well,
or how is it distinct?
I would actually distinguish it from equality.
Yeah.
So equity is the belief that we all want equal outcomes.
Yeah.
Whereas equality is actually another word for equality of opportunity, another way of saying equality of opportunity, which means that everybody starts on the same starting point, but some people are obviously going to get to the end quicker.
Yeah.
So it's not actually, it's just justifying.
Yeah.
It's justifying inequality.
Yeah, there's that famous cartoon, isn't there, with like 3 different size children standing on the same size boxes, but because one's shorter than the other, you still can't see over the wall. That's equality because they've all got the same size box. But equity is where they have different size boxes to make sure that they are at the same level and can see over the wall into the football ground or whatever.
So I don't think people realise that equality and meritocracy is a justification of inequality.
Yeah.
When you listen to the word, you don't realise that. Yeah. In fact, equity is the one that is focusing on social justice. Yeah. So one's a right-wing term and one's a left-wing term.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. The next one is empathy.
Right. Well, it's all about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in the business of education is about positive relationships, and that's why restorative justice is something that we have chosen to take on, having been quite a black and white school with our consequences. It was the fashion to have a sort of an assertive discipline model of education. We moved to that as a result of a challenge partner visit, where I saw it in the Compton School. I saw it in action, and the students were hugely positive about this approach because they said the detentions that they were getting meant nothing to them anymore. Yeah. They were just getting more and more detentions, and it was more and more punitive. And they said, this has now transformed things. So I wanted to see whether that was possible back in Penzance, and it's absolutely transformed things here.
Yeah, we recently, or last year, were made a restorative justice organisation, which is actually quite a hard thing to do. I mean, I think we, as an organisation, we still have some way to fully and continue to embed that in all the relationships. Mm-hmm. Is that something that's going to be pushed across the map, or?
Yes, definitely. We won't push anything, to be fair.
No.
We will. We will. We will attempt to construct. Well, I think we all agree that empathy is a value. So that this is a way of systematising that.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, one of the things we do here at Mount Space during the project weeks is try and help the students to empathetically see their place in the wider global community. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we did work on water and looked at places where they don't have running water and try and be empathetic with very different communities. So, how much does empathy tie in with trying to give the kids from Penzance a much more global view
completely
of their own lives?
I absolutely agree with you. Empathy isn't just about the relationship you have with your peers. It's about the relationship you have with your family, relationship you have in your local community, and then your country, and finally in the globe.
So evolution. All right, so next one's evolution. So why is that? What does that specifically mean on the E's?
Continuous development. We have constantly we construct our own personal learner identity through our interactions on a daily basis. We evolve as learner identities every day. Yeah. And we can get negative feedback, which influences us and whether we're going to learn well or not, and we get positive feedback. So it's really important to evolve a really positive and strong learner identity, and we do that through positive learning habits, which is where the HPL comes in. Yeah. So the whole organisation has got to understand that if we stop still now, we're going backwards.
Yeah.
times are changing so fast.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because obviously I'm a science teacher, evolution in terms of speciation doesn't necessarily mean constant change at the same rate all the time. And I know you and I have talked before about threshold concepts.
Yeah.
And actually, the first time I read an article about it, it was in the context. It was about Stephen Jay Gould wrote a book about evolution. He's an evolutionary biologist. He wrote this idea about threshold concepts in terms of understanding how evolution of species actually works. And he sort of essentially was saying that there's large gaps in the fossil record. I can edit all this out, but there's large gaps in the fossil record where there's a stasis and not a lot changes for millions of years. And then all of a sudden, you get vast array of new species emerging, and it puzzled people for a long time, primarily because they didn't realize that, well, they saw that as like a no change. They saw that as no data, when actually the threshold concept that these evolutionary biologists, as Stephen Jay Gould argues, what they needed to understand was data, and that they now understand that sometimes there's a period of stasis with no change, and then very sudden change. And I think learning can be like that sometimes, bringing threshold concepts in terms of learning. There's sometimes when you, for a long time, you sort of stuck, but when you get that threshold concept in a subject, you then suddenly go through a portal to vast new understanding, which was not opened up before. Do you see what I mean? So for a long time, learning, and like you talked about identities as learners, sometimes that might be, I've been at the same place for a long time, but then hopefully the teacher and the subject that you're doing, something might click, and that threshold concept will then suddenly scoot you on, and you suddenly get it, and it.
Well, Thomas Kuhn is the man here. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions is his book, and he wrote quite a few decades ago now, and he talked about paradigm shifts. And what you're describing, as far as I would say, is a paradigm shift. And I actually think we're living in a paradigm shift moment of history, and also in terms of education with the new Officer Framework and National Curriculum. We're just about to do a mini education paradigm shift, but the paradigm shift as a society is with technology and with global warming. And I think that all of those combined are making a sort of super paradigm shift.
Well, talking of which, what do you think about, in terms of technology, what do you think about the new AI systems that we've got here and that are beginning to influence education in a big way? The fourth education revolution. Anthony Seldon wrote about that. Do you think that's the start of the paradigm shift in technology that you're talking about? Or?
I think it's the very start. Yeah, I think it's changing what human beings. It's the start of the debate about what it means to be human now compared to when I was a child. And I think it's a completely different ball game now because of technology. So we don't, we have Gen Z, Generation Z, who are not thinking, behaving, feeling in the same way as I did when I was a child.
Seldon writes, I think, in the blurb of that book that for him AI is the start of humans learning to become more fully human.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well,
I think he's obviously an Enlightenment thinker. He's a classic example of that what we were talking about earlier as an Enlightenment thinker. But he is thinking too individually. The trouble with the Enlightenment, the whole of that Enlightenment approach, is it's all about the individual. And it fails to appreciate what's happening in groups and to society. So that's where my sociological training comes in, because I'm always going to ask the question: don't focus on the individual, focus on what's happening community-wise, as a group, nation-wise.
Do you not? I mean, but obviously, as schools, you have X number of children under your care at any one time. If we made or allowed them to become more fully human, whether that's appreciation of music, art, all the knowledge that one gets, all the skills that you can get, surely that's a massive part of it.
Well,
but you're saying that's not enough.
That's not enough.
Okay.
It's so selfish.
Yeah.
It's so egocentric. It's so.
Do you not think the knock-on consequence of that would be, though, a better society? If we suddenly produce 1,000 kids from Penzance, that were, as fully human as they could be, with in all that means philosophically and ethically, would they not then go on and affect the world in a more positive way?
If human flourishing meant community flourishing, and it wasn't just about them, then yes, of course, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I'm just saying I think that might be a consequence of.
It's not an inevitable consequence.
No, maybe not.
Because you've got great stars who've gone on to do wonderful things, but they don't necessarily give back to their community.
No, I suppose not. I'm thinking of various artists now that I know that perhaps weren't the greatest community people either. All right, fair enough.
And look at the great alumni that have come out of this school.
Yeah.
It's a quite interesting question.
Yeah.
Are they doing it for themselves, or are they doing it for others? Are they making the world a better place? Well, they are, because they're entertaining. If they're rugby players or they're singers, they are. Yeah. But it's all a little bit. It's all a little bit me.
Yeah, I mean that's a symptom of the modern world, though, isn't it?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You've just summed it up. And I'm saying the modern world needs to be, the script of it needs to be rewritten.
Yeah.
And the paradigm shift needs to have a script that is actually about communities and not just about individual.
Yeah. I just want to go back to Anthony Zola, because I think I misquoted him. I'm remembering it a bit more now. I think he says something like that schools up to now have been essentially getting kids to be more and more robotic in the sense of like exam factory churning out.
Yeah.
And rather than AI being the stuff that he's obviously the book's about AI, but he is calling that we need to move away from that sort of robotic exam factory style education into producing students that are more fully human. I didn't want to misquote him.
No, I absolutely agree with him.
But more on top of that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, he's working in a private school system where he's got lots more money, and it's possible for him to do that with his youngsters. For youngsters who aren't in that private system, that are in the in a working class area, in a public system, they are having to compete with that. That's not a level playing field.
No.
So he's talking from a very specific perspective, which isn't universal.
A context that is not universal, well, the final E is endurance, and
you've done very well during all this. So
as you know, I like this sort of thing. Helen's going to have to tie me up.
Oh, God. Poor Helen.
Anyway, so endurance for me is about grit, resilience, so is that obviously a characteristic of good learners, obviously. Why have we got that on there, on the list?
Okay, I think that we have got to understand that mistakes are an integral part of what learning is. Yeah. And mistakes can devastate you if you are not robust in your sense of self-worth and self-efficacy and self-identity. So you've got to build a personal, through relationships and positive experiences, you've got to produce young people that can make mistakes and understand that learning is all about that. And that's where the grit comes from. That's where the resilience comes from. So it's just becoming mistake friendly. Yeah. Yeah.
Not a lot more to say about that, really. But in terms of research, I read Grit by Angela Duckworth. She has backed that out in the book, at least with lots of research. I think she went to an American military academy and did lots of sort of grit scales, and she worked out that essentially, to summarise, people that scored higher on the grit score before they entered this hard boot training camp or whatever actually did much better in terms of how long they went and progressed onwards. But of course, she claims, bringing it back full circle to the growth mindset, she claims you can actually become more resilient. It's not an innate quality that cannot be changed. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, finally on research, I would say research is fundamentally a political project.
Yeah.
And people don't realise that, I don't think. So some people think they have the deluded idea that they are being objective when they do research. But the very question that they ask is context specific, historically context specific, and also time and age, and therefore clearly partial, and not 3D. You've got to focus, haven't you, when you do research?
Yeah.
So by the very selection of your research question, you have a political agenda. And so I would always be suspicious of all research, because I would always ask the question, what is your political agenda?
Yeah.
And so you just said to me about Angela Duckworth, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
The kind of research she's just talked about there, with all those scales that she's using, that's a psychologist's very personal, individual question.
Yeah.
And what she's doing is she's collecting evidence to support her political question that she has asked, her partial question that she has asked. Now, I know scientists say that actually it's all about hypothesis testing, but that's not the reality always of science, is it?
Not always. I mean, science as a methodology, as a philosophy, tries to remove as many of those baggages as you can. But clearly, I mean, for me, in terms of education research, obviously we've been reading this week about how, for example, groups like the EF their research isn't, even with large scale numbers, it isn't producing the sort of clear results that they want. And the question is, why is it? But they don't.
That's the point that they want.
Well, or that anybody, the clear answer that anybody would want. That I might have done a little Freudian slip there, but all right. But I'm just trying to remember the exact wording of this thing. It was something like large-scale tests don't produce as clear answers as might be suggested when the EEF produced their reports.
Well, what I say in sociology, there's two branches of sociology.
Yeah.
There's which is all about research.
Yeah.
Social science research. There's the branch that uses scientific methods and collects large-scale data.
Yeah.
Quantitative data, because it claims that it can generalise. To the whole population, and uses samples to do that. So it uses that whole approach that is, in inverted commas, scientific. That group of people that use that model fail to recognise is they are politically biased because they think they're objective, and they are not. In my view, they are inevitably partial. Now, the other group of researchers that sociologists or social science has, it's not just sociologists, are the qualitative researchers who look at something starting from the micro, so look at something in depth to get a real authentic picture of what's happening, and then tell a story which can be generalised. Now, what I would say is that what you want to do, and what good sociologists try to do, is a combination of the two to see where the truth meets in the middle. But what EEF fails to do, because it's rather inferior social science in my view, is it just focuses on one branch. It doesn't try to triangulate the qualitative and the quantitative approaches. And when you're studying human beings, you're not studying atoms.
No.
You are studying
very complex systems with multifactorial.
Well, and also they change as soon as you study them.
Yeah.
And I know atoms do.
Yeah.
Feuerbach, no, it's not Feuerbach. Who is it? Who is the famous Heisenberg?
The uncertainty principle,
Every time you look at something, the atom...
observation problem. I mean, obviously you've been talking, when you say political, you mean with a small p, but let's put a big P on it, because I read another research paper this week that said that there are some companies that essentially are paying for education research
Yeah.
that are, this article was suggesting, were then overinflating the data, the impact size, in order to then sell their product into schools. So they're saying, oh, we've got this brilliant thing, we've done these studies, the impact size is, I don't know, 8 months, to use the phraseology. And this study suggests perhaps that they've overinflated that score. So, and which is political, I would say, with a big P. It's certainly, economically political, because they're trying to make money, by getting their private company to selling to schools.
There's an explicit, extreme example of my point that all research questions have a political component. So you need to identify what the politics is of that question.
Well, my last question then is, how does one go about that? Because that strikes me as a very time-consuming thing for a busy teacher who, as we said at the start, teaching is an intellectual profession, and I think I wrote in a conversation once that teachers that don't engage with research-driven pedagogy are probably professionally negligent, in my view. But of course, that they need to be engaged with research that actually is authentic and as unbiased politically as possible.
So
how do you
this
determine?
is where Socrates comes in. Okay, because what I'd say is that you're presenting a model of the world which might suggest that there is a truth, a single truth, and research is aiming to find it. But you could, and that's a realist viewpoint, a scientific realist viewpoint. You could agree with that, or you could also have the debate about whether relativism is, so in other words, depends on the time and the place, that sort of stuff. So I think there's, I have really struggled with this. Am I someone who believes in a single truth or multiple truths? And I tell you where I've now come down to after years of thinking about it is I am a realist, because I do believe that there is a truth, which is based on my ethics, which is why ethics is in those 6 E's, and the truth is that we all know what's right and what's wrong.
Perhaps in terms of just final statement, so I've got Dewey. John Hattie writes in his books that teachers should know thy impact, and what I got from that is that and when you were just talking there, it reminded me that, or made me think that maybe then you could, as an individual teacher, you could take that research that says as a single truth that if you do this, your students will make more impact. It's incumbent upon you to try that yourself. And to answer John Hattie's question, to see whether it has an impact in your context, in your time, with your kids.
So I absolutely agree. So what I would say is that accept that there's a single truth, but then be that you then
pragmatic, I guess.
Have a question that you then explore and you follow up on, but then be critical of it. That's what I'm saying. It's not. It shouldn't be used to, research shouldn't be used to justify a viewpoint which is partial.
Right. Well, there you go. Thank you very much. Let's just have that recorded.
Well,
there you go.